some whiskeys to go through tonight. James Bornn, who's he's the rep, but kind of the local brand ambassador guy for.
I still don't know my job title. I have this awkward moment, Andrew, 3 times every day.
Yeah, like James, how do we describe you?
I'm the Massey brand ambassador for Canada. I mean, that's my official job title.
But more so than that, James, you're just a great dude. Like, we really like working with you. This is one of those moments where we'd say, like, we love you, man, kind of thing. But Authentic Wine and Spirits, which is one of our best partners, love working with them, especially with James. They've got GlenAllachie, they've got Wolfburn, they've got Gordon MacPhail, Ben Romick. I'm probably forgetting something, but they've got an awesome stable. And then they also do Massey wines. So if you're into big jammy Amaronis, James is also your guy. Probably also old, unusual bottlings of Amarone as well, and very large ones.
Yes, absolutely.
All of those things. But tonight we're going to talk about GlenAllachie, which is a distillery I'm a big fan of. And I know you are too, and Kurt as well. We've also been, and I'm speaking for Kurt and I here, been fanboys of Billy Walker for quite some time. Everything that he did with Ben Reek and GlenDronach, to a certain extent with Glenglaza, but then to see, like, you know, what he's done with GlenAllachie, again, taking it and making it quite an exciting and interesting whiskey. So we got the 15 to start with, gents. Should we maybe just start off there?
Let's do it.
Yeah, so the 15 is not all Billy Walker production. I think it's what, 6 years now that he's owned the distillery, or 6 or 7 years. It's coming up on that.
Yeah, 2017, I believe.
2017. But what he did at that time is he started looking at the stocks that they had. A lot of it was what's called re-racked, when you're taking whiskeys that maybe are not the style you want or not maturing quickly enough, and you put them into better wood. And the 15, I think, for the last 4 or 5 years has been really one of the rock star sherried whiskeys on the market, both for quality, but especially for price point. Everybody else has been really raising their prices for their 15-year-old whiskeys. And one of the things we love about GlenAllachie is, you know, inevitably things will go up in price as there's inflation over time, but those price increases have been relatively modest, and it's kind of been able to maintain that position. And it's not always in stock because of that. I mean, the supply sort of outstrips demand. But I remember when I met Billy at GlenAllachie about three months after he purchased the distillery. And one of the things I think is really cool about it is he's got this very long-term, old school view of the brand. And yes, when things are selling or things are extremely rare or old, you want to take some sort of capitalize on that to some extent. But you also don't want to take your consumer for granted. And I think there's a certain amount of looking at other brands like Springbank, like Ben Romick, and the way they're pricing things, and knowing that these are companies that are playing the long game. They're not worried about making a quick buck in the here and now. And there's something to be said for that. I mean, sure, maybe you could balance that supply and demand question a little better if you raised your price, but you're then excluding maybe some people from being able to buy the product.
And let's face it, look where we are in the whiskey world right now. Like, things are really, really peak right now. And there is a point when it's going to start doing that. And that's when you need your loyal customers. And I think these kind of guys like Billy have cultivated like a legion of loyalists with Ben Reek and, as you said, GlenDronach, especially GlenDronach, right?
This period is unique too, in that like the growth period has been probably longer than it's ever been in a Scotch boom cycle. And I feel like there's more perspective on that cycle within the industry. So you can really draw the line, I feel like, between the companies that understand that it's going to bust at some point and are cashing out now, versus the companies that are thinking, how can I survive during the bust period that is inevitably coming? And I feel like Billy is definitely in the latter group.
Well, and James, I mean, I think you're probably giving them too much credit. I don't think those companies are thinking about they're cashing in right now.
I think Gordon MacPhail is thinking about that.
Well,
no, I mean about like surviving through a downturn.
Oh, yeah, for that element for sure. But I think if you look at, you know, James, you can't speak ill of them, but looking at brands like Macallan and the way they've pushed their pricing, I would argue that they're actually more trying to pull as many eggs from the golden goose as they can. But they don't realize that by doing that, they're ultimately going to kill it. So,
well, speaking from working within the business, I think we sometimes assume that everyone within the business does have the passion that we have, but there still are plenty of people in the business that came in from outside industries. And if you treat whiskey like a commodity and from a purely capitalistic point of view, I mean, thinking long term actually is kind of foolish. So, it all depends on the perspective that you're coming from. Like for me, it's exciting. What GlenAllachie or Ben Romick are doing is more exciting for my place in the business, but for other people, it's let's cash out, and when people move to agave spirits, I'll go with them.
Yeah, no, there's an element of that. And, on a different level, and this is sort of a story I love telling, is I think people who really love Scotch whiskey have this romantic idea of even the people who make it. And I remember like 10, 12 years ago when I was taking people on whiskey tours, like people would be at their favorite distillery and they'd be so excited to talk to the stillman or the warehouseman or like, the visitor center manager, and like want to know what their favorite whiskey is. And they're like, oh, I don't drink whiskey, I drink lager. Because for them, it's a job. And I think that's true throughout the industry. Like some of the people making the things that we have tastings and do videos on and people write about and are so passionate about, ultimately for somebody else, it's just their job.
Yeah, and when you've got an industry like ours that has basically gone 10x in a 15-year span, you pull in lots of people from the outside, and that's that accelerates some of those phenomenon.
Yeah, well, and apologies because this is not where we were intending this tasting to go right off the bat. But what are you going to do?
I was going to say, should I give some GlenAllachie history, some context for this distillery?
Yeah, James. Well, what I'll just quickly say, the first whiskey, which you're probably hopefully sampling by now, is the GlenAllachie 15-year-old. I'm going to share my screen here really quickly. Bottled at 46%, finished in PX sherry and Oloroso sherry casks. And I'll put it up on the screen. And James, yes, if you'd like, why don't you share? Because it's an interesting distillery also in the fact, James, that it's not very old.
No, it's really not. No, it's it really does have a strange history. It was built in the 60s, actually, by kind of the same group that built the Jura distillery. I mean, there was kind of a period where there was this idea that they were going to build these new modern kind of mega distilleries that were very efficient and could pump out blended whiskey more efficiently than the distilleries that were built in the late 1800s. So yeah, the vision behind GlenAllachie when it was built in 67 was to have this efficient distillery to provide malt for the McKinley blend, which at the time was like one of like the big UK blended scotches. And Andrew, you can probably fill me in. I think like the blend at the time, like the core malts were like Dalmore and Glenvore and like some stuff that's very different than GlenAllachie. But anyways, that's what they decided. But McKinley, of course, ended up going out of business within like 10 years of that decision before GlenAllachie really made a name for itself.
Well, you were talking before, or you alluded to before, at least, the kind of industry going through cycles before, and without question, the cycle that kind of went off the cliff in the early 1980s was probably the most dramatic of those, and it took a lot of distilleries with them, including Glenvore. All of the Inverness-based distilleries went bust at that time. But yeah, that connection, I forgot about that connection to the parent company from McKinley's. But, the industry is so large that somebody's going to swallow up, or at the very least is going to want some of their assets. And so it survived, but part probably too, because it was fairly modern.
Yeah. So that's in the early 80s then is when Billy Walker would have first come across GlenAllachie, because it ended up in the Chivas portfolio. And it ended up kind of being like a filler ingredient in both Ballantines and Chivas blends. And Billy talks about that sometimes, about how he kind of, they didn't think too much of GlenAllachie at the time, but
Mhm.
he was thankful that he at least had that context. I think most, like, GlenAllachie Distillery for most of its life has been pumping out like maximum production and been going into like below average casks, like up until 2017. So
And let's be honest, that can work if you're going to turn around and leave your production for 20, 30 years and then bottle it. But it doesn't really work all that well if it's something that you're planning to bottle at 10, 12, 15 years of age.
yeah, which seems
Kurt,
to
do
be
you
what
wanna-
they're doing, because when Billy took over, most of the stock was 12 years and younger in the warehouse.
Indeed. Here, Kurt, do you want to chime in on the GlenAllachie 15?
Yeah, this is a cool one. I think a bunch of you guys know, I'll probably see some nodding heads here. We were lucky enough to do a store cast, a 15-year-old GlenAllachie, big, dark, grapey, big, uber rich whiskey. We were told we probably wouldn't get another one, and we've kind of just been, poking the bear every now and then. Hey, come on, see if we can wheedle enough to.
Oh, trust me, I'm trying.
Sorry,
I'll
James?
tell more about that story later, but yeah, there's it's hard to believe, but that's almost 4 years ago.
It is, but I think, with that one, they're fleeting by nature, of course. So when that one's gone, what do you go to? Well, it's not the same ABV, but it's the same kind of profile. It's that big, jammy, rich. It's got about the same age on it. It's a big, bold, brash whiskey at an age when there's way too many tinted ones. And I think Andrew would probably attest, because I think we've been singing the same song here. There's heirs apparent as you step down. It used to be Macallan, and then it was GlenDronach and stuff. These guys are one of the very, very few flying the flag for big, clean, rich sherry most of the time. A lot of really big, rich whiskeys. And I kind of think that there's kind of a mashup of BenRiach and GlenDronach styles, the sweet, fruity lightness of BenRiach, and then the big monolithic sherry of GlenDronach.
Yeah,
I think he's captured
that meatier, oilier kind of style.
Mhm.
The sherry notes on this are really nice. The fruits are soft. You get this Christmas cake treacle notes, but there's also some really nice, like, bright grapefruit coming out of it too. Like, this, it's big and it's sherry, but you can still see some of that original spirit character coming through too.
Yeah, GlenAllachie does, even though a lot of the independent bottlers prior to Billy's time, I would say the ones that I tried over the years were pretty thin. I think naturally the spirit of GlenAllachie is fairly heavy, which mainly comes from kind of like the short stills that they have, relatively speaking, with the descending line arms. But other than that, you're probably right, Kurt, that BenRiach is actually a pretty close comparable in terms of the style of spirit. That's not miles off. But then, of course, the casks are similar to what Billy would have used at GlenDronach. So saying that it's a fusion between those two is actually a pretty good description, I think.
Well, and then I guess that's something we could talk about a little bit towards the end, is sort of where is GlenAllachie going? Because when he acquired the distillery, he was not intending to just run it the way it had been run before. But maybe we leave that for a moment. James, I don't know if there was anything else you wanted to add or you want to talk about. I was actually scrolling through my photos to try to find my visit to GlenAllachie. I might find those photos, I might not. But
yeah, I actually when I went to Scotland this summer, I actually put together a video of some of my visits, and maybe I'll share it in the chat, even though it's got like Ben Romick and some Gordon MacPhail stuff. There is fairly near the beginning, there's some great footage that you can watch afterwards that's kind of like a tour, if you will, through the distillery, which could be kind of useful if you're into that sort of thing.
Not just useful, that's the romance, man. I love seeing that stuff.
I know, right? So I'll put the link in, and if anyone's interested in going and watch now, like I said, there's some kind of cheesy stuff because of course I present this to my sales team, but it's kind of fun. Well, let's save, Robin and Shannon are asking from a Billy distilled spirit release. I would say let's save that for the end, because that the answer is very, very soon. But we don't want to spoil it completely. Yeah, I think like the story for Billy for most of his career has not actually been about stuff he's distilled. He kind of just gets credit for his cask management. Now, again, I do think that's going to change in the next decade. But yeah, basically, Billy built these amazing relationships. First, when he worked at Chivas, because he was working directly with cask suppliers when he was working in the labs there. And then later on, he went to Distel and he was in charge of sourcing casks. So he had these great long-standing relationships. So that's why when he took over Ben Reek, it was like the perfect timing, because there was a lot of spirit in there that was in like poor old refill casks. And so he got on the phone and got on the phone with all these old cask suppliers. And I think the main one, which, you know, now has kind of made his name, is Miguel Martin, which provides, you know, someone was mentioning Edrador earlier. I believe they source their casks. And of course, you know, the main distillery that sources their casks from there famously is Glenfarclas. So really what Billy started doing is like basically gave them a blank check and just said, you know, give me all the great sherry casks you can get. And Miguel Martin is in an interesting position in that, you know, yes, they season sherry just like every sherry bodega, but they also actually sell a decent amount of kind of grocery store level PX and Oloroso sherries, specifically for like a lot of European markets. So they actually produce a lot of these like fruity, but still authentic Oloroso and PX sherries that are inexpensive. So because they're pumping all that out, they're actually creating some like legitimate ex-bodega sherry casks that are like really juicy, have tons of fruit to them, but haven't been just like given a 6-month wash of like first fill oak. And I think that's kind of the secret. And the 15 is like the epitome of that, obviously. Like it's just been drenched in these like wet casks that come over with like probably sherry still in them, let's be honest.
I'd love to see that sherry used to season some barrels that were already used once at least, whether it was bourbon or whether it was something, instead of putting them into something really rough and tumble and young. I'd love to see some old barrels rejuvenated with their sherry or their young super like grocery store sherry, like you said.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. There is still, you can kind of get a little bit of like the sherry barrels that were on hand when Billy took over, especially if you tried the old 25-year-old. It has a little bit of that. I don't think they were great quality. Certainly not what he's getting now.
Do either of you guys know the percentage that he re-racked?
Oh,
To be honest, Kurt, I think it's probably over 80%, but I don't know that number exactly.
Crazy.
yeah, over time, I think the majority of it has been kind of improved.
So
for
that
lack of
begs
a
the
better term.
question. The old school geeks here will probably love this. There's still some people that dig their heels in and go, man, those old Bruichladdich that never got re-racked, that were allowed to sleep till 30, 40 years were pretty damn special. You know, should some of this stuff have been left alone? I'd love to see if there's, you know, if there is 20% left, or if there is something, what that old
Yeah,
spirit.
some of the older barrels in particular. I think that Ronan, when I was there, alluded to the fact that some of those old barrels like were going in the direction of dying.
Yeah.
And I know that a lot of the 1978 stock that they had, they actually like amalgamated it because it was in rough shape and put it into like either some refill and some first fill PX butts, like bigger size, just to kind of let it rest and marry. So yeah, there is some like weird alchemy for sure that goes on with some of these casks. I think that's a big thing he does too, is like takes these butts and will take, you know, 3 or 4 hogsheads that were poor quality that are like drained halfway and just combine them into a butt that's first fill. To be honest, I think the Kensington Wine Market cask probably falls into that category.
Probably.
Yeah, I don't know that for sure, but
18?
yeah.
Let's move on to the 18 because yeah, I think people are probably getting thirsty. Now I am going to guess that this is not on our website, so I'm actually going to go to GlenAllachie, but I believe it's the same thing. You know, they've got a style they're going for. It's going to have been finished in again PX and Oloroso sherry, and I'll put it up here just from their site. Bottled 46%, non-chill filtered, no added color. So here we go. I mean, I think what I love about this, and it was the same a couple weeks back when we did the in-store tasting, is the 18 is just the 15, but with a bit more sophistication, a bit more layers. It's a little bit more elegant.
The comments are saying that they prefer the goopiness of the 15.
The 18 that I'm actually trying here is the original batch from 2018. So it gives a little bit of a hint that you're right. Like the 15 and the 18, I think were kind of just treated the same way. Just one was older than the other. So yeah, they're probably the two most similar in a lot of ways in the core lineup.
Almost got that old school sherry feel to it though, whereas the 15 is a bit more of that more modern style, a bit more jammy and in your face. But that I love that sort of dark chocolate tobacco tone coming through on the 18. That's sort of more of an old school sherry, kind of musty Dunnage warehouse note coming through as well.
There's a lot of cask influence though. It's really hard to see spirit when there's this much cask influence, right? But it comes down to what James said too, you know, it's almost like a position as a cask manager. It's almost like a different role he's elevated himself up on, and the rest of us have kind of looked at it and gone, holy crap, like this guy's released some of our favorite whiskeys over the last however many decades. And it's largely been ridiculous stock that he inherited, but he knows what to do with it. He knows what to vat together. He knows what to release as single casks. I think it's a gift.
Yeah, I think that if, you know, in lesser hands, a lot of the cask management he's done, in theory, could go really, really wrong. You know, it could be a mess. But he seems to be fairly consistent.
I'm still trying to troll through my Instagram feed to see if I can find that day and that visit that I made to GlenAllachie, but so far I have failed. So we'll keep looking. But in the interim, I think you've got two different versions of the same thing here. Kurt, you're right. I think with that big sherried style, you're always going to lose an element of the producer kind of the spirit style and all that within it. But then I guess the question I would ask you is, for like a sherried whiskey, for a finished sherried whiskey, like, do you think this is the profile that, you know, this is a well execution of that profile, given the limits they have? They couldn't full term mature this in sherry.
I do. I think this is kind of the new school of sherry in a way, where it's a lot more spice driven, kind of deeper, richer, fresh, dark fruits, as opposed to things that are mellow for a long time and kind of tropically kind of. I think honestly, it's beyond just losing a bit of the spirit character and stuff like that. I think you got to go, that's not a sacrifice in a case like a distillery like this. It's aiming for big sherry. You're looking at it more like, what is the brand trying to present? They're trying to present a big sherry whiskey. They're not trying to show you, oh, this is our naked spirit. They're trying to give you something. And I think this form is something we've seen. We can't keep on the shelves. We get big sherry whiskeys in, they're good. Everybody wants them. So they're doing it right. They're hitting it. They're clean whiskeys. They're good whiskeys. And I think it's they're blazing trails. They're breaking trail for a lot of people right now with this stuff.
The 18-year-old should be more readily available as well in the next 2 years. As I alluded to before, you know, a lot of the stock that they inherited, there was older stock obviously there, some of it going back to 78, but really like 2005 is where the stock like really starts and then goes younger from there. So yeah, I expect to see, they've kind of alluded that the 18 could be, you know, a little bit easier to come by in the future and not like the handful of cases that we get now.
Oh, that'd be cool.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it feels like it should be around regularly, doesn't it? I mean, there's a 12 and a 15, easy to get.
Well, I mean, what Shlomo's comment, like, would it be as special if it was regularly available? I think it's a sweet spot you're looking for, but the problem they have is, you know, even with these good relationships with the sherry producers, they're still limited in terms of what they can get for those casks. And you're not just trying to bottle your 15 and your 18 and your 21, you're trying to lay down stocks to have 25s and 30s down the line as well too. So it's a much more complicated math than just simply, well, if we finish another 100 casks of 18-year-old now, we'll have more in 3 years. There's a bit more to it than that, like where their stocks sit, where there's gaps in production, because that's one of the things that's not really disclosed is, and surely there was years when GlenAllachie under Chivas was not operating at anywhere near full steam. And so they've got less production from those years. And what does it look like to have a continuously available 18-year-old if you know that in 5 years' time you're going to run out again because of your stock profile?
Yeah, there's been a lot of that type of management. That's kind of probably been the story of the first 5 years, is trying to like map out what they have versus what they can actually do to build a proper business.
Before the Lolita conversation gets too offside in the chat here, should we go 3 years further and hit the 21?
Yes, please.
Yeah, let's go 3 years further. And I'll go to their website again for this one, just because you won't find this on our site, because we just don't want people to order something we can't get them. But the cool thing about this is we are bumping up from 46% to Cask Strength. And this is the third batch, or batch 3 of the GlenAllachie 21 year. So here you go. Just gotta hide that for a second. Again, marriage of whiskeys from Pedro Jimenez puncheons. Looking for that classic sherry profile. But again, look at the volume of bottles. And this is your global release, just 2,400 bottles. That doesn't go very far when you've got at least a couple of dozen countries that are significant Scotch markets, some of them larger than others.
Waiting for this one. I'm kind of excited about this one.
This is very much more in that GlenDronach style, like that PX sherry, sweet. Well, and also, like, look at Kurt, the GlenDronachs that probably imprinted themselves on people like you and I the most were the single casks. Like the core range was good, the 15, 18, 21 were good, but like what really got us excited were the single casks, especially when they were good. And a lot of that was finished in, I think a lot of us would have in a romantic way wanted to believe they were matured in Oloroso and PX sherry, but almost everything, or a high proportion of it anyway, would have been finished. Yeah,
We might want to romance certain things that way, but ultimately taste buds decide, right? I think we've been pretty clear saying that you can suspend any bias and it's beautiful.
Mm-hmm. Well, and we talked about this a lot when we would do the tastings for GlenDronach. There'd be a lot of people saying, is it a single cask? Because, at some point, multiple casks would have been married into a larger sherry cask for that finishing period, or in some cases for most of its maturation, but not all of it. And they beg the question, is it a single cask? And I would argue that it is, because from a traceability standpoint, what you're trying to figure out is, if this liquid is excellent and I want another bottle of it, what cask is it from? Because if it's from a different cask, it's not going to be the same. But if it's from that same cask, I know. And what happened up to that point is, I don't want to say it's irrelevant, but it's not as important as the fact that this is where this one bottling came from. And that's that traceability fact for me. I know there's a lot of people in Northern Europe that would strongly disagree with me on that, and that's okay.
I remember being in a tasting with Billy. This was years ago. This was in the GlenDronach days, and someone was really going after him for this. The fact that sometimes he will mix 2 casks into a first fill new cask. And his counterpoint was that in the environment that he grew up in, his elders, they were praised for their ability to essentially take 2 or 3 casks and put them into a new Paxaret cask.
Yeah.
And that there was like skill associated with that. And so I think it's just a matter of perspective at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm.
I think some of us want packs to come back at least.
100%. It would solve so many problems.
Oh, hell yeah, it would. Yeah,
I've tried to convince Shelter Point to Paxaret casks, and they won't do it.
Yeah. Well, there was a time and place where that might have been something they would consider, but you know what? There's a whole generation of new distilleries up and running.
Yes.
I'm sure there's one or more of them we could convince to do that. So,
Well, I know how to do it. So if anyone's listening and wants instructions, Jacob and I may have gone down the rabbit hole. So
nice.
Will's asking what casks are. So you're basically like high pressure blasting like grape must into the barrel to give you a ton of sherry influence, basically. Shortcutting it, but it was sort of a cheat, but at the same time it wasn't. And I think it gave us a lot of those beautiful sherry whiskeys that we just immediately go to all these old, we think transport casks or whatever. I think there was an awful lot of paxing for a long time that nobody really wants to talk about, or that we've had proper transparency.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look at 1964 Bowmore, Paxaret, Tullibardine 1966, which was kind of like a really interesting style to Paxaret. There's a lot of it that was out there in certain years, and then it got banned at some point along the way. So it's, I mean, the funny thing is, like, we can be really critical of what we call speed seasoned sherry today, which is that modern sherry style Kurt was alluding to earlier. But I mean, this was the original speed seasoning. And I mean, it was truly speed seasoning. They were putting it in at high pressure, and it was not for long periods of time. But the whiskeys that came out of that.
Keep in mind, though, is that in those days, again, this is coming from Billy, it was very easy to source. Like, there was inexpensive Paxaret then as well. But a lot of distilleries were using what was very easy to find, which was like 30, 40, 50-year-old Solera, you know, PX and Oloroso sherries, just by the bottle, and they would buy it off the shelf at grocery stores. And of course, that sherry was so concentrated and had, you know, sweetness to it and so much flavor because it had aged for so long, that using that as the base in Paxaret would cause, you know, a fairly nice profile of flavor to enter the wood, as opposed to now if you were doing it, you know, with something much younger.
Mm-hmm.
I think we have to look too, because you kind of hinted at it, Andrew. We have a little bit of a almost barely concealed animosity towards these sherry, like new school sherry seasoned casks and stuff. But the reality is, if we want to be pissy about it to the point of letting an entire style of whiskey die, there's not enough sherry being consumed. There's not enough of these old barrels around. So do we just give up on sherry because these barrels are exhausted and dead? Or do we find something else to do? And I think you kind of got to give credit where credit is due. These guys are doing everything they can to put sherry butts and sherry casks back into circulation, even if they have to season them themselves. And I think maybe when those barrels are used a couple times, we'll start to lose that really aggressive, just beyond virgin oak influence. Let's face it, some of these casks are 6 months old or less than 2 years old by the time they get Scotch whiskey into them. They haven't been mellowed like an ex-bourbon would or ex-sherry. But I think once those barrels get used a couple times, they're going to be sexy. I think it's going to be cool. But short term, it's been a little rough and tumble, but it's going to be better.
So on a side note, kind of teased earlier, I did find my posting of my visit to GlenAllachie, and this is all it is, was the fact that I got to try the original 25. This is like 3 or 4 months after he had opened the distillery or bought the distillery and was trying to figure out what he was going to do with it. So it was one of those weird things where I was sitting in the blending lab with him because he was trying to do work, but also trying to humor me because I'd come to visit. And I got to try the first batch of 12 before it was even completed. And like, what do you think about it? So it's kind of hard to be put on the spot in that sort of situation, but cool whiskeys. Guys, let's talk quickly about the 21. I'm interested in your thoughts, Kurt.
The nose right off the bat, I was like, okay, yeah, this is more in my wheelhouse. I'm a bit of an ageist. We had finally admitted that I have a problem. A lot of the older ones are better. There's no two ways about it. Not always. There's some crackers that we're about to come into here that I absolutely love too. The nose on this one wowed me right off the bat. But the palate, I think I'd maybe go back to the 18 for the palate. It's just a little bit softer and prettier, I think. A little more austerity there. The nose on 21, palate on the 18, slam them together. I'm happy. Mr. Ferguson, what do you think of that one?
I like it too. I'm kind of torn because I sort of like that more meaty, spicy, tobacco-y style of the 18, but I do love the sweetness of the 15 and the fruits that come through on it. So they're both great. They're both different. I mean, dollar for dollar, I think if I had to pick one, I'd pick the 18. But
James?
let's see how that changes as we go through and come back around the horn.
Yeah, I think the if you were gonna say like a whiskey that's just fun to drink, this 21, you know, it checks those boxes for me. It's so, you know, it's not sweet and jammy, but it just goes down so succulent, so easy. You know, it reminds me so much of those kind of 12, 13-year-old PX cherry glendronics, but just with more maturity. So I love it. I love the 21. But yeah, it's not like the most complex or thought-provoking whiskey that Billy Walker's ever made by any stretch.
No.
I don't think it's designed to be that way though.
No, it's kind of alluding to where they want the product to go in time. But I mean, so I alluded to this when we started, and actually this will be our kind of transition before we go into the young stuff here. I actually did find the photos. I just had to look a little closer. So this is the day I went and visited GlenAllachie. It probably looks different now because they've had a chance to dress it up and build a visitor center, things that didn't exist before. Previously, visitors were not even welcome to the site. It was
This
a
is
classic,
before they renovated. You can see it's
Yeah,
still
it
the
was-
old sign.
the old sign, everything is original. And you can actually see a little bit of a link here to Tormore with like that, the roof profile and the faded copper. They had a chance to put the branding inside the mash room. There's the washbacks. And the reason I do want to show this though, and this is something we talked about, when I got there, I mean, I sort of had a feeling what he might say, but I instinctively right off the bat asked him, you know, so Billy, like here, this is production they've made that's now 5 years of age. Billy, you know, you've bought the distillery. Obviously, it's not exactly the profile you want it to be. What are you going to do? And he said, we've already done it. We've slowed our fermentation. We've slowed our distillation, and then the re-racking. So, I mean, it's more than just the wood. It was basically a complete retailoring of the spirit profile. He didn't buy GlenAllachie because he loved the spirit as it was, but it's because of the potential that he saw in the distillery to make something even better. And we've talked about Kurt and I and others in the tastings we do. We really love these long fermentation whiskeys because they just have a fruitier profile to them. They're more complex. They can sometimes stray into funky notes, but that's just part of what we love about the profile of them. And that slower distillation, being more precise, taking more time to craft that spirit. I mean, those are the things we love to hear. And it astounded me when I heard the actual fermentation time. James, you might have it in your head, but
I have it exactly. It was 55, by the way, when they took over.
But isn't it like 140 hours now? Or is it 120?
That was so the initial trials in when they initially bumped it up, they went up to 140, which they thought was ridiculous. And then now the standard would be 160. And then across weekends, it's 190.
Wow. So to put it in perspective, like 55, what it used to be, that would have been short for most by most distilleries, but like 72 hours is longer than most distilleries would ever ferment their wash. So to be doing 3 times the length of fermentation shows you the commitment that they have to making their spirit. Like that's cutting into their capacity. Like that's a bottleneck that, you know, you've got to leave your wash in so long that you're going to reduce the amount that you can distill on a weekly basis. So that's quite a commitment.
The bottleneck is a good word. So before the last year before Billy bought it, they distilled 4.2 million liters. And that was with these 55-hour ferments. They have 8 washbacks. Well, with the new system, they're doing about 1/10 of that. So about 500,000 liters. But they had to add 2 more washbacks.
Just to hit that.
Just to hit that. There's a reason, by the way, Andrew, this is a little bit geeky, but why Billy likes those long ferments. And it's not the same reason we like them. I mean, I'm sure it's part of it. But he is anal retentive about stills where the the froth gets up into the line arm. So he has this feeling that certain distilleries that have these like shorter profiles, that when the foam gets up there, that it creates a burnt note. And he always talks about how, well, Convamore is the safe example we can give without offending anyone, that had always that burnt note that took like 30 or 40 years for it to work out. And he felt like they would be getting that at GlenAllachie if he didn't lengthen the ferment time.
Yeah, well, whether that's the reason or not, I mean, I love it. And again,
Yeah, I love
going
it
back
too.
to the stills, here are the stills. I mean, like you can see they've got like the line arms are parallel, so you're not gonna any of that froth, if it gets up there, the foam, it's gonna just spill over. So that makes sense, but regardless, I think you go back to, again, this being a very purposefully crafted spirit moving forward, and it's a legacy project for him that, who knows where it goes next. But let's move on to the 10 Cask Strength. These are a little easier to come by now than they were a couple of years ago. Things got stupid. I don't remember, James, was somebody gave it a big award. It wasn't that guy, was it? That guy that
No, it was one of these, so there's all these whiskey award shows, whether it's San Francisco, and one of them that's somewhat high profile is the World Whiskey Awards. And actually, it's funny, the bottle that I have in front of me is batch 4, and that was the batch that it won the world's best single malt at the Scotch Whiskey Awards. I want to say that was probably in 2020. So, because that was still early in the game. And I'll tell you right now, when that happened, if I'm being honest, we were having internal conversations about if GlenAllachie was going to work, because we were having a heck of a time selling it at the time. Because, trying to beg people that, trust me, this is Glendronach.
Yeah.
Which the irony, of course, is that Glendronach sales spiked the second that Billy announced that he was selling. Like, we had our 2 best months in history after the announcement of that sale. But moving people over into the new packaging got a lot easier.
Well, James, remind me if this was what happened, because my vague recollection of this was that most of that batch of tenure had already sold, had it not? Like, it was.
Oh yeah, it was gone. It was
sold.
batch 4 was out. We actually took less of batch 4. In fact, we gave it. It's funny. We begged the BC Liquor Board to take batch 4 because we had so much stock of batch 1, 2, and 3 in Alberta. We were having talks about how we were going to like discount it to get rid of it. And then this award came out, and I remember seeing it, and I was thinking, like, we got this email from people at GlenAllachie, and I was like, guys, like, nobody cares about this award. Like, hate to break it to you, but boy, that warehouse was like empty in 48 hours. We sold every single case of batch 1, 2, and 3 within 48 hours that we had.
Well, the reason why I think this is funny, James, is that I seem to remember that we, and by we I mean Kensington Wine Market, had already brought in and sold a decent amount of batch 4.
You took almost the whole allocation, if I remember correctly.
And then, but it was gone. And then the only thing I was disappointed by was that then everybody else came in and cleaned up what was left of 1, 2, and 3, which we had been selling for years, and just took for granted that it would, like, there'd be stock. But there was a bit of, shameful joy there, that schadenfreude that, it's gone. We already sold it. So you can't have it.
There was really only probably yourself and maybe 3 or 4 other retailers in all of Canada that really kind of like got GlenAllachie right from the get-go and kind of understood like the bigger vision. So thank you.
Well,
but the good news is, if you miss batch 4, batch 8 probably is the closest to batch 4 of all the batches that have been released so far. So it's a really good kind of benchmark for what the 10-year-old is about.
Oloroso, Rioja, and Virgin Oak casks at 57.2%.
Yeah, and batch 6 and 7 were heavy on the Rioja and the Virgin Oak. That was just purely an experiment that they realized was less successful. So sorry if you've got a batch 6 or 7 at home. I know some people love them, but they're not as jammy and and sherry drenched.
And I think that explains why 8 and 9 are, have been a little slower off the mark again, because, up to batch 5, everybody was like right in line with them. They loved what it was. And then 6 and 7 changed the dynamic a little bit. Demand decreased. Those still sold, but I think maybe people who bought them just didn't like them as much as the previous releases.
Yeah, and batch 8 and 9, I mean, they might be the 2 best batches, like even including number 4. They're both they went straight back to the sherry formula.
Well, and I mean, these have also had, presumably, some of the whiskey has been finished in sherry longer than in those earlier batches as well.
Yeah, that's
These are
safe
things
to
that
say.
were re-racked. Kurt, what are your thoughts on batch 8?
Batch 8. It's kind of like contemporary versions of Luna with
Yes.
that's like floral note I get with Luna typically, but kind of close to that style. I would say though, there's a better balance here than Luna has had in years. No, not trying to take shots at Aberlour, but I am a big Aberlour fan, but I think this is just a little bit more even keeled. And
Well, this product, Kurt, was designed specifically to go head to head with that product. That's why it has a 10-year age statement, is Billy thought that he could differentiate it. Yeah, he was throwing a punch, is what he was doing. Yeah.
Well, and in reference to Aberlour, that old grade mare ain't what she used to be. So
Yeah.
What about the 9, Kurt? Because I'm taking it from what you said that you were already ahead of us comparing the 2 side by side.
I think everybody should be bouncing back and forth between these 2, because we've just literally, James has turned a light on batch 6 and 7 as sort of comparables and stuff, and referencing back to 4. You only really get context with these things when you can do them side by side. And I think what's cool to me about these 2 is it's kind of, and I'm not talking the spirit profile, but it's the Springbank thing, where don't aim for the same 10-year cask strength every time. Aim for the best 10-year cask strength you can release at a time. Don't worry about consistency. Just put out the best product under that banner. It makes so much more sense to me. So you can see there's differences here. I think the 9 is a little bit prettier on the nose. I haven't had enough time on the palate yet, but there's a softer kind of edge to the 9 that I'm really kind of digging so far.
Mm-hmm. Well, the batch 8, I would say it's spicier, it's earthier. Batch 9 is dumpier, it's more sherried, like chocolate, candied fruit. The sherry to me comes out more in batch 9 than it does in batch 8.
Which do you prefer?
I don't know if I can say which one I prefer yet. And I've probably already said too much of that before letting people have a chance to vote.
Sorry.
Yeah.
But
no, this is a good example of how putting them side by side versus coming to the bottle directly on any given day would produce all sorts of different results.
While people are tasting through those, can we discuss the elephant in the room here? What's with the Stone logo?
Well, GlenAllachie is
the Flintstones was the way to go.
But it's a reference back to this. James can tell you it's a reference back to the distillery name.
Yeah, so of course GlenAllachie does mean quite literally Valley of the Rocks. And one of the things that I know David Keir told this story. Oh, did I lose internet there for a second? Sorry about that. So when they were doing the renovations, they wanted to tie into this and have this big stone right by the front gate that would have the distillery name. And they had no incentive to have that be their logo or anything specific. Anyways, this stone carver used this like Flintstones font. And I think like in his mind, he probably mentally was thinking about the Flintstones and like almost accidentally put that font onto the stone. And they decided to roll with it as their logo. I don't think that was the original plan.
So Brookladia's had the old like Inverleven still out front. They've had the submarine, they've had the boots, they've had all that kind of stuff, right? It's a wasted opportunity if GlenAllachie doesn't put like a Dino sculpture or something out there. Play to it, come on, man.
Or, some of our favorite visitor centers, Kurt, have a cafe.
Absolutely.
Maybe they have an old school drive-through.
Could be amazing.
but you know, and I don't know how many people notice this because it is pretty subtle, but like even going back to the box, like the box has that stone effect to it in different colors. So all of those are little subtle nods to the distillery name.
When I went out to
Uh,
sell this stuff in the early days, I would say I had more than 25 people, like respected whiskey retailers and restaurateurs, tell me they thought it was the worst whiskey packaging they'd ever seen in their life. I mean, you weren't one of them, but in fact, I think I recall you saying that, you know, all good whiskey tends to have like frumpy packaging.
Probably that sounds like something I would say. I also remember a funny conversation because one of Billy's original partners in this was, I forget his first name, but his last name is Stevenson. And the reason I know this is because
Yeah,
his
Graham
sons,
Stevenson.
because Alistair and Gordon Stevenson are both in the whiskey industry and have worked with various companies, including Alistair, I think, was with GlenAllachie for a couple of years, wasn't he?
Yeah, and they want them to come back. Both of their dads want them to come back.
Well,
They've got an
yeah,
indie line, right?
what's that, Kurt?
They
Yeah,
just
they've got
launched an indie bottling line, right?
well, it's a blended malt range, turntable
Yeah.
spirits. Anyway, I remember being drunk in the pub with Gordon and Alistair Stevenson, and I was like, oh man, it's so exciting what you guys have. But if this is before anything had been bottled, no packaging had been released, I was like, can I tell you my dream of what I would like a distillery to do? And they were probably a little scared. And they were like, sure. I said, put it in the tall round bottle with no box, like literally the cheapest glass bottle you can get. Do whatever you want with the label, make the label fun, make the label cool, but like don't go for bespoke packaging and bottles and stuff. And I said, you know, I want there to be a distillery out there that is just going to not get into the trend of putting it in a fancy bottle and box that costs money, that at the end of the day, the consumer doesn't need. And a lot of them, especially the consumers that are, I would call connoisseurs, don't even care about. I told them to do it, and I think it was too bold an idea for, and I get it.
All those Bacardi distillery packaging, it is beautiful. The work that Stranger and Stranger did on all those, like GlenAllachie and Altmore.
Alke's amazing.
Well, the GlenAllachie, I don't change it. I love that. It's superb.
The Altmore is great too.
Yeah, agreed. I like Altmore.
I'm a tougher customer. The GlenAllachie is the only one that I actually really like of them. But
That's great.
But I mean, I would love to see companies be bold enough to be like, our whiskey's awesome. We would rather save you $5 than put it in a bespoke bottle and box. And that's our brand. Our brand is purely about the liquid. It's not about the non-recyclable box we're going to send it to you in. It's just about purely the liquid. And I'd like to see somebody come out there and be that bold and own that.
McLeod and Springbank and companies like that are starting to do more of that. They're starting to say we're ripping the packaging away.
Well, and I mean, it's the right decision, but the reason they did it is because they didn't have access to cardboard. And they came around with this great story that it was because they were trying to be environmentally conscious, which is great.
Yeah, Compass Box did the same thing. They got rid of all the boxes for like Peat Monster and stuff, but really it's because they couldn't source them.
Yeah. But I mean, that's fine. I don't think we need those. And all it does is it costs people more money. There's a certain amount of waste involved in it. And sure, for your like $500 or $1,000 or $2,000 bottles, if you want to put that in some kind of bespoke art box, like that's fine. But for your middle of the road malts, they just need the bottle. They don't need.
Well, Andrew, I remember when Ben Roma came out with their new packaging, people complained that it kind of looked like diminutive and that it didn't look premium. And a lot of the things that they didn't share is that a lot of this was forward thinking, and same with those connoisseur's choice, like those cardboard boxes that they come in. Everyone in the Scotch business, at least in these long-term models, is acutely aware that there's a lot of rules coming in certain markets. Like in Quebec is a good example, where if your bottle is heavy or doesn't hit certain goals for sustainability, you actually get dinged. So a lot of it is, in fact, like GlenAllachie is going to be revamping their packaging at some point too, to go to a lighter bottle that ships. So you may have foretold the future, Andrew.
You ever start lugging cases of Bladnock around, and you'll understand why that needs to happen.
Yeah, no doubt, no doubt.
There's a funny reference to our tasting kits there, which I like. Thanks, Shlomo. Shlomo, that's it's spot on. And actually, while we're on the subject, by redesigning our advent calendar box this year, it's less cardboard and more recyclable than previous years. So go us. All right, let's go on to the 2012 Vintage Cuvee. James, do you want to tell the story about this guy?
Yeah, for sure. This, a lot of these distilleries and whiskey companies in Scotland have been going through this problem in the last few years of, having these iconic master blenders or master distillers. And, when you try to transition to the next generation, whether it's like Kelsey McKechnie at Balvenie or Grey Glass at White Mackay, like it's a little bit tricky. And I think GlenAllachie is acutely aware of that. And so, of course, in theory, the heir apparent to Billy one day will be his son, but also, of course, Ronan, who works with Billy in the lab. And I think this was kind of a side project of Ronan's that kind of came to fruition. So as we know, Billy's obsessive about just gathering pretty much any type of cask he can get his hands on. And they sourced some really strange casks here. So Bordeaux, of course, which would be like, medium toasted French oak. And then Valpolicella, which is interesting. So specifically, they had Recioto casks. So these are like unfortified, sweet red wine casks that would be a little bit bigger. They'd be kind of like 600 liters. They started playing around with this. And I do think this is going to be something that will recur over time. I think they've accumulated quite a lot of these various wine casks. And a lot of the whiskey in here, the youngest is just shy of 10 years old. And then actually a lot of the whiskey in here is well over 10 years old. But of course, they don't quite do the Compass Box level of disclosure.
You mean that you can't email them and they won't send you a full list of the casks and
Ronan might do that, but I don't know. I think that they had internal discussion about waiting. They were gonna have to wait like 4 months for it to hit 10 years old. And Billy just basically looked Ronan in the eye and said, like, these 9-year-old casks are gonna cook if you leave them 4 more months, like do it now. And
Tons of respect.
It's a good different take on GlenAllachie, which is well needed.
Now, Kurt, I've got a sneaking suspicion that this one is not in your wheelhouse.
You're right, but there's a big but there. I actually don't think it's bad. I don't think it's overly whiny. I think if you told me this was some kind of sherry cask, I could probably believe you. It's not overly funky and fermenty, or the back end isn't a dirty mess to me. It's still not my style particularly, but I think it's executed well.
Yeah. No, Ronan mentioned when I saw him at the distillery that, the industry has created a whole generation of whiskey consumers that like, this is their preferred style. Like raw wood, youthful, like really assertive on the front of the palate. And, this kind of checks that box.
Mm-hmm.
It's definitely created an old guard and a new vanguard of whiskey drinkers. We've talked about it a couple of times in the shop where there's an entire generation of sippers growing up now that are never going to know some of the styles that those of us that have been around for a long time have been able to try and stuff. And this is the new frontier of whiskey. It's young and it's spicy. There's going to be a lot of stuff that matures, and then 5 to 10 years from now, we're going to see kind of swing back the other way, I think. But right now, this is what people are the young people that are coming into it. This is what they know of Scotch whiskey. This is the profile that people think Scotch whiskey is.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Good, not bad. I just think it's what this age knows. What do you think? On the spot there.
I was just thinking, theoretically, if someone was to create a modern take on Octomore, You know, really, the original Octomore is almost 15 years old. Like, it's kind of is your father's whiskey already, which is like a strange way to think of it. But
Although
it's
sadly,
already
we
gone
never,
generation.
you know, we've yet to see a really old Octomore. And that, you know, Kurt, I don't know if you have any insider info on that, but I mean, that might be because they know that it's a spirit style that's going to show best at a younger age. And so maybe they've been bottling most of it.
They do.
Well,
We were
yeah.
lucky when we were there a few weeks back. We spent the day with Adam Hannett, and he said exactly that. He said, you know, we do play with it, and we have seen it older and everything. We've seen it work, but you know, that's not what Octomore is per se. And we were lucky enough to try some 18-year-old Octomore when we were there. It was crazy cool. But at that point, it's an old peated whiskey. You know, we've had a fair few of those, and it's really, really good. Don't get me wrong, because I'm a junkie for Bruichladdich spirit. But it doesn't taste like what people think Octomore is. It doesn't.
No. Well, I mean, I think that's why we haven't seen a repeat of the Octomore 10, because I think they looked at it and said that this is not what we wanted this to look like. And so they went on. Oh, that's not is that a ruby bottling, Kurt?
This?
Yeah, you know what I mean by
this goes back and forth with me every time I go to Bruichladdich, and I should be careful what I say, but they're kind enough to send me away with a sample of something. And I won't say what it is, because a lot of times they're like, you know, you can't say what that is, you can't say the cask number or whatever. But there's always something cool that comes away, and that just might happen to be a unique Octomore. And it's sadly not the 18, because if I had that, I'd love to share it.
Well, there is an 18-year-old Port Charlotte being released by Bruichladdich this year, right?
Yeah, so cool.
Yeah,
But
indeed. So, Kurt, back to you. Put me on the spot. I struggle with this. Like, I think it's a cool expression. It's not what I would want to drink. Like, I find it's got like, it's very peppery, it's very tannic, but without like the rewarding fruit that I would expect to get with that. So in that context, it's a little austere for me. It's not really my style. You know, it's kind of like some Italian wines where it's all about like that leather, tobacco, spice, and the fruit's dead. Those aren't my style of wines either. So
yeah, someone told me once that you know, if you grew up in the UK and you're used to drinking tea, like things that are kind of like austere and go in that bitter, savory direction, just, you know, we have more Coca-Cola in our diet, so we expect a little bit more fruit. There is some truth to that.
That could be the case. I mean, I do like a Coca-Cola every once in a while, though not as much as I might have used to in my younger years. Maybe that's an interesting thought. I've never considered that before. But I'm also, you know, for me, for that either sherry or wine cask style, like if it's going to be that style, I want it to be kind of what I want it to be and not something different. And the wine casks for me have been really hit or miss. And this is not just GlenAllachie, it's frankly with everybody. They're very, very hit or miss for me.
I've said this multiple times, and I'd like to hear you weigh in on it, Andrew, because that's probably generally me speaking on it. But I think wine casks are getting a lot better. I think they're being handled a lot better. I think they're being rinsed more and reconditioned and stuff like that. And I think we've lost a lot of that. Like James talked about, you know, maybe subpar casking for a lot of stuff, not just GlenAllachie, but a lot of the industry was just throwing shit into wood for a long time. And I think we're seeing more and more people go, hold on, that wasn't necessarily beneficial to what we're trying to do here. And some people have been passionate about it, whether it was Mark Renier or Lumsden, Nature, whoever. They've been chasing these casks and trying to do cool things with them. So I think they're managing them a lot better than in the early days of just throwing stuff in a wine cask and seeing what would happen. You agree?
Yeah, I think.
Well,
Go ahead, Andrew.
go ahead. No, James, you go ahead.
Okay, no, I was going to say one of the virtual tastings that you did, it may have been Waterford, that they mentioned about treating those French oak casks that have wine in them, and how you can get things like, you know, volatile acid and vinegar that can really like play tricks with whiskey if it's not treated correctly, and that not everyone knows how to do that. And I think there's probably a lot of truth to that.
Well, I think you're going down to the wet fill. And I mean, stepping back from Waterford was Mark Renier and Jim McEwen at Bruichladdich, where they were wet filling wine casks with Bruichladdich spirit, or even worse. Like I remember the Murray McDavid bottlings where they were taking like 16-year-old Ardbegs and wet filling them into Amarone casks and they were calling it acing because it would be like 2 weeks. But ultimately, they were taking 16-year-old Ardbeg, putting it in a cask that still had 10 to 15 or 20 liters of Amarone wine in it that probably wasn't all that fresh because it had presumably taken a boat to get to Scotland. And then like the whiskey would come out pink. And most of them were dreadful, like just dreadful. But I think they learned from that. And I would imagine that at the very least, handling it properly means dumping the cask and probably giving it a quick rinse.
Yeah, steam, I think, is the key that I remember when whoever it was, I can't remember now, but they talked about like steaming the cask properly to kill any bacteria.
Ryan, on the comment of buying the pink Ardbeg for a novelty, there were two. One of them was like barely finished. It didn't have anything and it was drinkable, but it wasn't great. The other one was probably one of the worst whiskeys I've had. It would be in my top 10 worst whiskeys ever, which is saying something. Yeah, there was also a lot of other un-PC things said about pink whiskey back in that day that we don't have to rehash. Anyway, on to the MacNair's Lumreek 10-year Cask Strength. This is batch 2. This is the new one.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
So we kind of fanboy out a little bit on the Lumreek stuff in the shop. In particular, I think we've been trying to pull people towards the 21 in particular is really, really, really sexy. Mainland Peak can be really hit and miss. A couple of you guys know, one of them has been my favorite distillery now, one of James's brands. It's kind of kicked Ardbeg to the curb, and Benron kind of sits on top of my heap now. So I kind of get a little bit weird when I see, Mainland Peat, and I don't know what all is in this. I don't know all the components to this.
Well, I have a good idea of what is in it. And so, yeah, of course, when Billy inherited the stock, there was a lot of blending contracts in place for the White Heather and what was the old MacNair's brand. So basically there was casks lying around of, I think mainly here, Kurt, we're dealing with Lafroig and Kalila.
Wasn't there peated Benriach in there too?
A little bit of that as well. I think one of them may have had Ardmore in it as well, but I'm not sure. But I know that like the majority of what they've used in the Lumreek bottlings has been Kalila number 1 and Lafroig number 2. But I think overall, like it's none of them are more than 25% peated malt. Like I think GlenAllachie is still kind of the core ingredient in almost all of them.
It's working. I think it's a really cool range they've done. And I kind of have a bit of excitement over the batch concept that they're carrying over here as well.
Yes, agreed.
I have fun watching how this evolves, and I hope they do the same with the higher range stains. I hope we see that done in batches too.
No, I've been trying to convince a lot of people that, ask me when like the 21 is coming back in stock and if they can get a bottle. I'm like, go out and buy a Lumreek 10-year-old Cask Strength. Like that's the tip of the spear for GlenAllachie right now.
Slow-mo is flagging the name. Is it the MacNair name or the Lumreek name? Because the Lumreek is wicked as far as I'm concerned. But I'd like to know what the...
I'm curious, by the way, did anyone end up getting one of those old Lumreek bottles that look like Canadian money? Like old Canadian money from the 80s?
Yeah, it looks like John A. MacDonald on the bottle. Here, I've got it right here. Look at that.
Yes.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, this is an all-timer. Like, who approved this?
Yeah, it's terrible. It's not the worst packaging to come out of Scotland. There should be an entire awards category for that because some producers are just like their packaging is incredibly bad. We won't we won't throw any stones at a glass house at this moment in time, but bad as that is, it's still far from the worst. So back to the MacNairs, people asking, sorry, I shouldn't share that. I was just trying to find the right page, but people saying like, oh, I'd really like to get the 21. Well, how about the fact that MacNair's Limerick 21 is available and a pretty reasonable price too?
Digress, Andrew.
I think Harmony and I kind of, we fell hard for the 21. And then we walked back through the range and properly spent some time with them. We're like, holy crap, this range is a lot of fun. We poured them at a couple of festivals. I'm digging the entire range. I don't know who's putting it together. I don't know if it's Billy concocting these or who it is.
No, this is Billy's baby. I think if Billy could do anything, this is what he would do is make Limerick batches.
It's cool.
Like that would be his happy place.
It feels a little bit old school without being really old school.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's a nice level of peat too. Like it's kind of in that Bowmore range of peat where you've got like enough that it's very noticeable and it's very prominent, but not so much that it takes away from some of the other elements of the whiskey.
And I think it's, sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, incidentally, footnote, I don't think we have batch 2 on our website. We've only got batch 1 on our website, but which is something we should look into. Yes. But you were saying before I interrupted.
I honestly don't remember. It was something about the Limerick.
Was it my Bowmore reference or the light peat, or?
I think it did have something to do with that. If it comes
So
to me, I'll
licoricey.
jump in.
Well, why don't we get to the speed round? Because then we're going to trigger a vote. So let's jump back to the 15.
Pancakes.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it's so syrupy.
Man, there's so much fruit on these 12 and 15-year-olds. GlenAllachie.
So for me, like the best, like, not inexpensive, but the best reasonably priced sherried 15-year-olds out there right now are like the GlenAllachie 15. And we're not just saying this because James is with us, but Benromic 15, which has got a bit of peat, but also excellent. And then the Linkwood 15 and Mortlake 15 from Gordon MacPhail. Like, I can't think of 4 better sherried whiskeys at a decent price than that. Shlomo's throwing Springbank out there, which can be good. The last or second from last batch of it was no bueno though. But agreed that Springbank 15 is usually excellent. But I'm thinking of things that are actually available. Like those 4 whiskeys are kind of hard to beat.
Yeah, Benromic, I think in particular, and I was with Shlomo. The Springbank 15 was my favorite 15 on the market for a long time. And then we cracked that guy for the festival, and I think all of us went, "Whoa, what happened?"
We actually were questioning whether we should pour it, because after we tried it, we're just like, oh man, that is so sulfured. But like, how often do people get to try Springbank 15? And some people really loved it.
And one bad batch can't spoil it. And we love the batch variants. We just, touted their praises for that. But consistently, epically perfect 15-year-old is Benromic right now. Mm-hmm. But anyways, we digress. Big sherry guys, this one and Tamdu for me are like, those are the big boys.
Tamdu is lovely.
I forgot the Tamdu 15.
Yeah.
Tamdu 15 is, Kurt, you were talking earlier, and I meant to have a little side note on that about like, who are the heirs of Macallan? And 10 years ago, I would have told you it was Glendronach, but now I think it's GlenAllachie and probably Tamdu. To a lesser extent, Glengoyne. Like those are the true heirs of Macallan style out there right now.
And long term is the Cairn for sure.
Yeah, or just anything of that age bottle by Gordon MacPhail matured in first fill sherry, because it's going to be good. All right, GlenAllachie 18.
It's veered away from the 15 for me. 15, when I stuck my nose back in, it was all like maple syrup mixed, like proper maple syrup mixed with Aunt Jemima's or whatever they call it now. The fake, the real, everything. This one is just still a little bit prettier, a little bit lighter, a little bit fruitier.
More chocolatey,
Change.
a little bit settled down. It's more elegant, but Glen Turret, I don't know, because Glen Turret's rebranded, and well, I guess we'll have to see. We haven't seen them yet. They've rebranded because they're owned by Lalique Crystal now, and they're uber premium. And I guess we'll find out. We'll find out what's happening there. Anyway,
I didn't realize it was that simple, but Macallan and Delmore and everybody have done it. I just want to brand myself as ultra premium. Just that's who I am now. I'm special. I don't
so
have to be good.
I just want to be the tall round without a boxer or two. That's all I want to be. All right. Nothing more and nothing less than what people are expecting. 21 Cask Strength batch 3.
Seems a little bit more mincy on the palate to me now, or on the nose and the palate. Sorry, mince meaty right off the bat compared to the 18. A little bit richer.
Yeah. And it's settled down with the ABV now too. Like, it's more drinkable than it was before. It's quite pretty. It's a lovely bottling. And I have to try those again to see which one I prefer. James, oh, you know, I keep forgetting. Do you have a different 21 at least, or you just smile and nod?
I pulled out the Limerick 21.
Oh
boy,
that's what I did instead. Yeah, I have had all 3 batches though. They're all a little different. I mean, they all kind of follow the same theme, which is that like PX, just plush, gooey goodness.
Oh.
Yeah, it's splitting hairs between them.
All right, 10s. Doing the nose first, just like Kurt.
Should get a bit of bubble gum on the 8.
You can see that. It's settled down. The 8's, it's still spicy, but it's settled down.
a bit chocolatey on the palate. You're dead on. I would have stolen your words because you used that a few minutes back. I was literally just going to say those same words. It's settled down really, really nicely. I wouldn't guess the strength to be as high as it is just based on the way it sits on the palate right now, which is always a good thing.
Whereas that batch 9 is like, it's almost exactly as it was the first time we came around. The sherry is really prominent. It's dumpy, fruity, syrupy, chocolatey. It's a very different beast from batch 8.
Great.
Which, Andrew, I got to say, dumpy sherry is my new favorite Kensington Wine Market ism.
I don't know if that's a commonly used tasting note by other people, but there's things that just taste dumpy to me. And dumpy sherry can be really good, but it can also be bad. It's one of those ones that can go both ways.
Kevin asks what it means. I think we kind of just think it's like that really heavy, kind of clumsy, over the top sherry. Like
it's like the sherry that feels like you could spread it on toast.
Yeah.
Like it's thick, oily, but it's fruity and just like jammy. Yeah, I don't know. Dumpy is dumpy. I don't know how better to.
Yeah,
better
but it's
I think it's going to catch on.
It's like compression in music, right? Where I think with those dumpy styles, you've lost some of the high notes and it doesn't have like the really, really deep, rich notes to look for. It just kind of sits in the middle spectrum of just kind of, it's chocolatey, it's spicy, it's a bit fruity, it's a bit mince meaty and whatever. It's just kind of a narrower spectrum, I think.
Yeah. 2012 vintage. Like getting like hickory sticks and like, I'm guessing like a sweaty baseball locker room.
Hickory sticks are my favorite food on the planet, I think. when I'm sick, my wife knows to bring me red Gatorade and hickory sticks. That's my get better soon kind of thing. I'm not getting hickory sticks here, but now you've made me crave them.
Wow. I'm still struggling a bit with that one, but that's me.
But it's not bad, right? Like it's not unbalanced per se. It's not.
There's zero flaws. Agreed. Yeah. There's zero flaws. It's just not my style.
Yeah.
And I guess where I'm struggling is that I like to think I'm one of those guys that has an appreciation almost everywhere in the spectrum, but wine cask is one of those weak spots where it's like a 50-50 chance. I want to love it. But the MacNair's now on the nose is standing like way above where I think most people would assume it should be for a quote unquote blended malt.
That you hinted at it earlier, Andrew. That level of peat on it is wicked. Mm-hmm. It's not heavy. It's not, over the top. It's not medicinal, despite, whether it's Kalila, Lefroy, whatever is in this one. It's not offensive. I think people that don't even like peat would probably be okay with this kind of smoke and this level of smoke.
It's so drinkable.
A little bit creamy too now, which I didn't expect on it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to trigger the poll here, but while we're on that, I kind of want to bring back the Lumreek because, James, I struggled with the first incarnation of Lumreek. I don't know why, but I didn't like them, but this more recent one with the 12, 21 and the 10 cask strength, I think they're a much better product. And it's not even branding, it's purely the liquid, I think is a big improvement on that first incarnation of it.
Yeah, I agree.
All right. Well, the votes are trickling in. Now, James, this might be a little tricky for you, but as you've said, you have tried them all. Yeah. So I'm going to give you a moment to think, but I'm going to put Kurt on the spot first. Kurt.
Yeah.
We're gonna let you have 3 tonight, so we're gonna start. Just one. What's your third favorite in tonight's lineup?
Do I have to rank them? I can give you my top 3. I just don't know what order to put them in.
Well, you're gonna have to put them in an order. I want number 3. Yeah. If you had to kick one of those 2 to the 3 to the curb, which one are you gonna kick to the curb first? Like the IKEA lamp, the one in the rain that's sad.
I think.
Which one are you gonna make sit out in the rain?
18. The 18.
Okay.
There was a couple jokes here, it's the who would you kill, who would you marry? Anyways, I think number 2 would be the GlenAllachie 10 cask strength batch 9. There's just something about it. Better balance than I expected. The nose just got prettier the more it opened up, and the palate just seems to work for me. I think I preferred the palate on the 8 to start, but it got better on the 9 as it went. Cool. And then number 1. Man, I think that Lumreek is a banger. So I think that's my number 1 of this lineup.
Oh man. Kurt, I'm loving your selections tonight. Like they're not ageist. You're well done, sir. Well done. All right, James. Favorites.
Third
you
favorite.
Have all these in front of you.
I sense that the room is not with me tonight, but I actually prefer 10-year-old batch 8 to batch 9. In fact, I think the batch 8 is my favorite, like of all the GlenAllachie 10 batches. I absolutely love it. But it is a fun exercise. Putting batch 8 and batch 9 together in particular that's like the sharpening of your palate type of comparison. So that's fun. Second place, I'd put the 21-year-old. I mean, man, I just would have a tough time ever saying no to that whiskey. It's just so easy to get into, but I would not go back to that 21 as much as I would go to my favorite tonight, which was also the Lumreek 10. Man, I just love these whiskeys. I find that every time I come back to them too, like they have layers to them, which is at that price point is really remarkable. I think it's exciting. I wish there was more whiskey like this, and I also wish it was easier to sell it.
I think too, we have to be grateful when we find these ones. Like we can sit here and a couple of us are saying like right off the hop, yeah, that was my favorite. It's not expensive whiskey. It's not very often you can find something you're like, oh man, I found that one that stuck through the cracks. Good whiskey, great price. There's not many of those anymore.
No.
Kurt? new tasting idea,
Yeah,
whiskeys you should want.
yeah.
Or we'll find a better way to romance it, but like
Yeah.
things people should want, but don't know why they should yet.
Should
No,
this
Limerick
be
10 to
nine?
me, Kurt, is like, you know how we all love to complain about like whiskeys that don't exist anymore from the past? Like
Mhm.
Limerick feels like someone went in the past, stole an old whiskey from the past and brought it to the present, and everyone's like, meh.
Yeah, I think that's where I was going earlier when I said it kind of feels old school, but not quite. Like
Yeah.
there's something about it that I don't know. You guys know me. I kind of like those dirty old school farmy styles. It's not quite that, but it's kind of in that sort of Venn diagram.
And James, I think someone commented on it in the chat earlier too. There's something about the label. I think this is the one thing they're still struggling with is the branding. I don't know what you should do with the branding
It's
on this,
so
but I think
goofy.
it's, well, I mean, what is
Look
it?
at
When
the
you look at it,
round
what is
labels
it?
are hilarious.
Yeah. So I don't know. All right, my favorites, gonna buck the trend here, but the 18 is my favorite. My second favorite is the Limerick 10. I agree that's got such a nice balance to it. And my third favorite would be the GlenAllachie Cask Strength Batch 9. I think that's a great bottle. The 21 and 15 are both great, but I don't know, sometimes that value proposition creeps into the picture and like, would I pay what they're asking for it? And it's not to say that I wouldn't pay what they're asking for the 21, but I'd rather have two 18s than a 21. So I think
But I do want to spend more time with that 21. So this is the first time I've tried it. I was excited about that one. I really liked what it was. I think I need more time and more than half an ounce to properly say whether I love it. It's a cool.
Well, James, didn't we do this last year? Didn't we put the only one or two 21s we had into a tasting? Because that was a way
I
of,
think you've done it with all your 21s. We've done them in tastings. The batch 2 was when we launched your cask, and batch 1 was in a tasting with the 25. I remember we did with David.
The dark days of COVID.
Yeah.
Way back when. So on that subject, I'm going to share the results in a moment. Everybody who purchased tickets for the in-person or the virtual tasting for GlenAllachie will get an email tonight. We have a little ballot. There's not a lot of bottles in it, but in situations like this, we want to reward the faithful. So check your inbox tonight. The ballot's open until Friday morning. There's some 18 in it and a single bottle of 21. Want to reiterate, it's just one bottle. So, don't be too disappointed if your name's not selected to buy it, but full transparency in situations like that where we get 3 or 4 bottles of something or even 6. That's the only fair way to do it. And we do check to make sure people registered for the tasting. But other than that, it's purely just random number generator and pick who gets to buy the bottle. All right, the results I will share with everyone. What have we got here? We've got first favorite. Look at that. GlenAllachie Cask Strength Batch 9, 10-year-old first favorite. The good news there is you don't have to enter a ballot to buy that. It's just on our website or in the store. You can walk in and grab one. The 18 and 21 tied for second, the 15 and third. MacNair's Limerick gets a vote. But what I really love is second favorite. It is all over the map. And what's cool about that is everybody's finding something to like somewhere in there. And that's cool. I mean, there's people here disagreeing with me because they like that GlenAllachie 2012 vintage balling. That was their second favorite. And I think that's awesome that there's a difference of opinion there. If everyone liked the same thing, it would be a pretty boring world. Gentlemen, anything else we should mention or tease or talk about before we wrap?
Are you baiting me, Andrew? If you're not on social
James,
media,
I am actually intentionally baiting you. Yes.
Yeah, if you're on social media, you'll notice. To be honest, GlenAllachie didn't even tell me when they were going to start teasing this. I think they just waited until they were ready. But yeah, in the next kind of week to 10 days, I think GlenAllachie, you're going to want to watch for what they're releasing. Yeah, I genuinely think it's one of the most exciting things to come down the pipe in the whiskey business, period, in a long time. It's going to be something you're going to want to get your hands on, and it's going to be something that's affordable and is exciting. And yes, spoiler alert, it may have something to do with, whiskey that Billy didn't manipulate, but that he made from scratch. And that's exciting. And yeah, I mean, Andrew has tried a version of this. So
is that a spoiler alert, or is that the whole script?
Well, no, there's a lot more to it than that.
I would say James redacted elements of what he was speaking about there. So there are some strong redactions. I do want to ask though, James, is it going to be in a tall round bottle without a boxer or two?
Taller and rounder than the current bottle.
Okay. All right. That's fair. That's fair. James, I want to thank you for being available to help us with tonight's tasting, and also for being a great partner with us on all these things. Just about any tasting we do involving one of your brands, you're an awesome supporter. So thank you for that.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks everyone for coming.
Of course. And also on that note, I know Kurt's got a comment, but I do want to say, like, if you'd like to see better availability for things like the 18, like James mentioned, or the 21, go out and support brands like the GlenAllachie 12, 15, the MacNair's 10, and 12 if you don't want Cask Strength, because all those things will help the long term.
We have to beat Quebec at sales of the 12 and 15.
And I guess also one bit about that too is, like, if you're like Kurt or myself and you want to go out and support an independent whiskey company, I mean, that's essentially what this is. This is not part of a big multinational. It's a standalone independent whiskey company, making whiskey because they love it and they believe in it and they want to make the best possible product. Kurt, you've something to share.
I did. I just want to second what Andrew said, working with James, and it's not just work either. Whiskey club events I put on, other events, he not only wants to be involved and stuff like that, he actually gets involved. He gets his hands dirty, like, oh, this one would be great with this, and this would be great with this, and he'll throw out notes and he'll actually be engaged. And I think you guys heard it here tonight. He's giving us facts about other distilleries and things like that. He's a guy that knows this stuff and is passionate about it himself. So when you get somebody like that, they're chasing good whiskey themselves. They want to do things with that whiskey. So he's a brilliant, brilliant partner to work with and brings us tons of cool stuff. So buy his stuff because they're the ones bringing us all the cool stuff that's making us excited.
Very kind. I still can't grow Dave Worthington's beard though. The goal.
It's pretty, but you know what? You could start wearing a different hat with every tasting.
That's true.
You could take that, like maybe a different hockey helmet, like a different colored hockey helmet every tasting. It'd be a bit of an investment, I guess, but anyway.
I'm all right with that. Well, jerseys printed of bad Flames players from through the decades.
Oh man, just one last quick memory. I was really lucky. My dad coached John Tonelli's son back in the 80s when he was on the Flames, because his son was about the same age. And my brother and I got invited with Tonelli's son to skate with the team during the open practice they did every year. So we got to go into the dressing room, and like I'm maybe 8 years old. And I got a hockey stick there, and I'm getting all the Flames to autograph it. Half of them buck naked, because this is against the 80s. It was a different time. And one of those guys, like, talk about bad players, but who served a purpose at the time, Neil Sheehy.
Yes.
I'm pretty sure was one of the worst slashers in the history of the NHL. So anyway, that should be one of those jerseys, but just saying. Well, listen, James, Kurt, thank you. Thank you everybody who took part in tonight's tasting. Email coming out in about 45 minutes or so into your inbox for that. Reminder, if you were thinking about getting a whiskey calendar, don't hesitate. There's some really cool stuff in there. And after Saturday morning at 12:01 a.m., it's going to cost you $40 more than it will between now and then. Thanks for joining us. Hopefully we'll see you at a future tasting. There's still spots left for the Ben Romick tasting that's coming up. Not many, but there's a few and a couple of other great events. So check out the website. And until then, have a great night and we'll talk soon. Thanks, everybody.